My son and I pulled off the greatest act of our lives that weekend, and nobody in that banquet hall had any idea. But let me take you back to the Thursday night when everything changed. The night I almost lost my boy to someone who saw him as nothing more than a transaction. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years driving heavy equipment for a county road crew, and before I retired I made sure my son had every opportunity I never did. College, graduate school. A good start. His mother, God rest her, used to say I worked myself half to death so he wouldn't have to. She wasn't wrong. When she passed 8 years ago from a stroke that came without any warning whatsoever, it was just the two of us, my son and me. We became closer than most fathers and sons ever get. He calls me every Sunday morning without fail, as since the funeral. That boy is my whole heart. So when he called me on a Tuesday in October and told me he'd met someone, I was happy for him. When he said her name was Vanessa and that she worked in pharmaceutical sales and drove a white Lexus and laughed at all his jokes, I was even happier. He's 34. I'd been quietly worried he was going to work himself into an empty apartment and call that a life. I met her for the first time at Thanksgiving. She was pretty in a polished sort of way. Very put together. She talked a lot about her job, about her clients, about a conference she'd attended in Phoenix. She asked me very little about myself. I noticed that. But I let it go. Some people are nervous, meeting the father. I gave her the benefit of the doubt. By Christmas, she'd moved most of her things into my son's condo. By February, he was showing me rings on his phone. He asked me what I thought, and I told him the truth, that I thought he should take his time, that he'd known her 4 months, that love is real, but so is rushing. He smiled at me the way young people smile at old ones when they think we don't understand the urgency of being alive. He said, "Dad, I know. I just know." I remembered saying the exact same thing to my own father about his mother 40 years ago, so I let it go again. The engagement party was in March. Her family came down from Milwaukee. Her mother was pleasant enough. Her father shook my hand with both of his and called me brother, and I appreciated that. The party was at a rented space in Midtown. Catered, open bar. My son looked happier than I'd seen him since before his mother got sick. I told myself I'd been worried over nothing. They set the wedding date for the second Saturday in September. 8 months to plan. My son's income is good. He's a senior software engineer at a logistics firm. Makes just over $110,000 a year. Has a 401k. Owns his condo outright because I helped him with the down payment when prices were still reasonable. He's not rich, but he's solid. He's built something real. That Thursday night in August was not supposed to be anything. I'd driven down to help him move some furniture he bought for the new place they were renting together, a house out in Decatur, Georgia. 3 bedrooms, nice yard. We'd spent the afternoon hauling a dresser and a sectional sofa up a flight of stairs, and I was tired in my bones the way 63 feels different from 33. Around 7, he ordered pizza. Around 8, Vanessa texted that she was going out with girlfriends and would be home late. I was getting ready to head back to my place when my son's phone rang in the kitchen. He'd stepped out to the car to grab a jacket he'd left behind, so he missed it. I wasn't going to touch it, but I rang again immediately. Then a third time, and when I looked down, I saw the name on the screen. Vanessa. I almost didn't pick up. I want to be honest about that. My hand was on my keys, but something, I don't know what to call it exactly, just a feeling, made me press the green button and bring the phone to my ear without saying anything. She wasn't calling to talk to me. She didn't know anyone had answered at all. She was already mid-conversation when the call connected, and the voice I heard on the other end wasn't the warm, practiced voice she used around the family. It was looser, sharper, more real. She was talking to a man. I stood perfectly still in that kitchen. The pizza box was still open on the counter. The refrigerator hummed. I didn't breathe. The man said something I didn't catch fully, and she laughed. Not her laugh, not the one I'd heard at Thanksgiving. And then she said, clear as anything, clear as the day my wife told me she loved me for the first time. Baby, relax. 2 more months, and it's done. His condo alone is worth $400,000. I've already talked to my cousin about the paperwork." The man said something again, quieter this time, and she said, "He has no idea. None. He's so sweet, honestly. That's what makes it easy." I set the phone down on the counter, face up. Call still connected. I walked to the back door, opened it, and stepped outside into the night air. My heart was doing something I hadn't felt since the emergency room 8 years ago. I stood there on the back step until I heard my son's footsteps coming back through the front door. I needed 30 seconds. I gave myself 30 seconds. Then I went back inside. He was shaking hot pepper flakes onto his pizza slice, telling me something about the neighbors, and I smiled and I sat back down, and I finished my dinner, and I did not say a single word about what I'd heard. Not that night, because I'm 63 years old, and I have learned, through loss and work and time, that what you do in the first 10 minutes after hearing something devastating is almost never the right thing. Rage feels like action. Rage is almost never actually action. I needed to think. I needed to be sure, and I needed proof that would hold up, not just in a conversation, but in a courtroom if it came to that. I drove home that night, and I sat in my driveway for 22 minutes. Then I called my old friend Dex. Dex spent 20 years as an investigator for the Fulton County DA's office before he retired. We played dominoes every third Friday at his brother-in-law's house. He answered on the second ring. I told him what I'd heard. All of it. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said very calmly, "Tell me the man's name if you heard it." I hadn't heard it. He said, "All right, here's what you do." Over the next 3 weeks, I did exactly what Dex told me to do. I kept showing up. I helped move more furniture. I had dinner at their house. I watched football with my son on Sunday afternoons, and I acted like a man with nothing on his mind but retirement and whether the Falcons would make the playoffs. Every time I hugged Vanessa hello or goodbye, I smiled like a father-in-law who couldn't be more pleased. And quietly, on the side, Dex helped me find things. Her credit report told a story. She'd filed for bankruptcy 4 years ago after a divorce from a man in Chicago. That man, according to court records Dex accessed through his old channels, had accused her in their divorce proceedings of financial fraud, specifically of hiding assets and running up debt in his name. The case was settled. She'd signed a non-disclosure. But the records existed. The man on the phone, Dex eventually determined, was named Kevin. He worked at a car dealership in Marietta. They'd been together, based on her social media going back 18 months, long before she ever met my son. I sat with all this for 3 days before I decided what to do, what I wanted to do. What every part of me as a father wanted to do was walk into my son's living room and lay every document on the coffee table and watch her world fall apart. But I thought about the comments I'd have made in his position. I thought about being 34 and in love and having your father show up with accusations about the woman you've chosen. I thought about how love makes people defend the indefensible, and I thought about how, if I handled this wrong, I might lose my son in the process of trying to save him. So I did something harder. I called my son on a Sunday morning, our morning, and I asked him to meet me for breakfast. Just the two of us. He said of course, and we went to the diner we used to go to when he was in high school, the one with the orange vinyl booths and the waitress named Beverly who's been there since the Clinton administration. I ordered coffee and eggs. He ordered as usual, the Western omelet, and when the food came and the waitress left, I put my phone on the table between us with everything on it. The recordings Dex had coached me to make of my own conversations. The credit report, the photos, the divorce records from Chicago. I watched my son's face. I want to tell you he got angry. Anger would have been easier to watch. What actually happened was that the color left his face slowly, like a tide going out, and he sat very still for a long time looking at the phone screen, and at one point he pressed his lips together, and I could see him doing the thing men do when they are trying very hard not to cry in a public place. He said, "Dad," just that, just my name. The version of it he'd used since he was 4 years old. I said, "I know, son." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "When did you find out?" I told him. The whole thing, the phone call, the kitchen, the 30 seconds on the back step. He listened to all of it without interrupting, which is something his mother used to do too. That quality of being able to hold still inside a hard thing while it was still unfolding. When I finished, he looked out the window at the parking lot and he said, "The wedding is 6 weeks away." I said, "I know." He said, "The venue deposit is non-refundable. The catering is paid. 94 people have plane tickets." I said, "I know all that." He looked back at me and I could see him turning something over. He's an engineer. He thinks in systems. He said, "What if we don't cancel it?" I want to be clear. The plan that followed was entirely his idea. I would not have thought of it. I'm not sure I would have had the nerve for it even if I had. But my son is his mother's child as much as mine, and his mother had a particular gift for meeting cruelty with something that hit harder than anger ever could. He said, "What if she goes through with everything thinking it's real, and we let her, and we make sure that when it falls apart completely?" He called his attorney that same afternoon, not a divorce lawyer, a contracts attorney he used at work, a woman who was sharp and thorough and did not waste words. She drew up a prenuptial agreement that was thorough in the specific way that matters, covering the condo, his 401k, his stock options, any assets acquired during the marriage, future inheritance, everything. She also added a fraud clause. Any evidence of deception prior to the marriage bearing on the financial terms would void Vanessa's entitlement to any shared assets entirely. The question was how to get Vanessa to sign it. My son went home that Sunday night and told her that his company's HR department had flagged a new policy requiring employees above a certain income threshold to have prenuptial agreements in place before marriage. Something about liability and benefits eligibility. He said his HR rep had given him the form. He showed her the document, which looked entirely official because it was. She signed it. I don't know what she was thinking. Maybe she was confident enough to believe it wouldn't matter. Maybe she thought the condo would fall outside the terms. Maybe she didn't read it carefully. Whatever her reasoning, she signed it on a Wednesday evening and my son photographed the signature page and sent it to his attorney before midnight. Then we waited. The remaining 5 weeks were the strangest of my life. I attended a bridal shower brunch. I gave a toast at the rehearsal dinner that I had written and rewritten 9 times, finding the words that were true. That my son was a good man, that marriage was a sacred thing, that I wished them clarity and honesty, without saying anything that wasn't. Vanessa hugged me afterward and said I had made her cry. I told her I meant every word. I did. The wedding was on a Saturday. The ceremony was at a church in Buckhead with stained glass windows and an organ that shook the floor. My son stood at the altar in a charcoal suit his mother would have loved. Vanessa walked down the aisle in a white dress that her mother had bought her, and she was genuinely beautiful, which made the whole thing somehow harder. I sat in the front pew and I held myself together by thinking about what was coming next. The reception was at a hotel ballroom nearby. DJ, 3-tier cake, choreographed first dance. 94 guests eating chicken piccata and raising glasses. My son danced with me for a moment off to the side of the floor, and he leaned close and said, "Tomorrow, Dad." I said, "Tomorrow." I drove home that night and I did not sleep. The next morning my son called me at 9:15. He was calm in the way that people are calm when they've been awake all night rehearsing how to be calm. He told me he'd sat Vanessa down at the kitchen table that morning before she'd had her coffee. He'd placed 3 things in front of her: a printed copy of the divorce records from Chicago, a printed copy of the cell phone records showing 47 calls to Kevin's number in the 2 months before the wedding, and a letter from his attorney outlining the fraud clause in the prenuptial agreement she had signed. He told me she went through 3 separate phases in about 4 minutes. First, she denied it. Then she said she could explain. Then, when he slid the cell phone records across the table and pointed to the dates, she stopped talking entirely. She left that morning. She took what she'd brought, her clothes, her toiletries, the Lexus she'd made payments on. She did not take the ring, which surprised my son until his attorney told him that was almost certainly on advice from someone on her end who understood she had no legal footing to stand on. The divorce was finalized 7 months later. She attempted twice to contest the prenuptial agreement. Both times the fraud clause held. My son called me the Sunday after it was all over. Our usual time, 9 o'clock, coffee on both ends of the line. He asked me how I was doing, and I told him tired but good. He said, "Dad, I've been thinking," he said. "I keep wondering what would have happened if you'd gone outside for 2 more minutes that night. If you'd already been in the car. If the phone had been in the other room." I told him I thought about that too. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I want you to know that I know what it cost you to sit across from her all those weeks and smile. I know what that took." I told him it didn't cost me anything. I told him the truth, that when you love someone the way I love him, holding yourself together for their sake doesn't feel like sacrifice. It just feels like what you do. He said, "I love you, Dad." I said, "I know you do. I love you too." We talked for another hour about nothing in particular. The weather, a book I'd been reading, a fishing trip we'd been putting off for 2 years that we finally decided we were actually going to take. Just a father and his son on a Sunday morning. The way it's always been, the way I intend to keep it for as long as God gives me the time. Some men come into your family pretending to love what's yours while they figure out how to take it. I've learned at 63 that the best protection you can offer the people you love isn't anger. It's patience. It's paying attention. It's being the kind of person they trust enough to sit across from in an orange vinyl booth and hear the hardest thing you'll ever tell them. My son is doing well now. He's been promoted. He's cautious about dating, which I think is wise, though I've told him not to let one bad chapter close the whole book. He calls every Sunday. And that, I suppose, is everything. I've been sitting with this story for a while now, turning it over the way you turn over a stone you almost stepped on in the dark. The thing that stays with me isn't the moment I heard Vanessa's voice on that phone, though I still hear it sometimes, clear as anything, that loose and careless laugh. What stays with me is the 30 seconds I spent on that back step before I went back inside. 30 seconds. That's all the time I gave myself to fall apart, and then I chose something different. I think about what would have happened if I'd walked back in swinging. If I'd let the rage do the talking, I would have gotten loud. My son would have gotten defensive, and she would have walked out of that condo untouched. No prenup signed, no fraud clause, no consequence at all. She would have found the next man. She would have kept going, and I might have spent years trying to repair what I broke with my boy in one careless moment. What Vanessa didn't understand, what people like her never seem to understand, is that the choices we make don't disappear. They compound. Every lie she told was another brick she was laying in a wall that would eventually fall on her. She didn't need me to destroy her. She'd already set the whole thing in motion herself. I just made sure I was standing clear when it came down. My son did something that took more out of him than he'll ever fully admit. He sat across from that woman at rehearsal dinners and cake tastings and a bridal shower brunch, knowing what he knew, holding himself completely still. That is not a small thing. Most people, most young people especially, cannot do that. It requires a kind of discipline that doesn't come naturally. It has to be built the way muscle is built, through repeated decisions to hold on when everything in you wants to let go. I raised him to think before he acted. His mother and I both did. We told him 100 times growing up that your first reaction is almost never your best one. I didn't fully know if any of that had taken hold until I watched him sit across from me in that orange booth and say, quietly, "What if we don't cancel it?" That was the moment I understood that he had become the kind of man I'd always hoped he would be. Not because he was cold. He wasn't cold. He was heartbroken. But he was also clear-eyed, and he chose clarity over comfort. That's the thing I want people to hear when I tell this story, not the revenge, not the prenup, not even the fraud clause. What I want people to hear is that doing the right thing and doing the smart thing are not always opposites. That patience is not weakness. That walking back into a room and eating pizza and smiling while your heart is in pieces takes more strength than anything I've ever done on a job site or in a weight room. And that the people who love you, really love you, will sometimes need you to be stronger than you feel, for longer than feels possible, because their whole future depends on it. My son calls every Sunday. That's everything.